Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO and former Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Wanted to get your thoughts on the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Well, it's unthinkable, unspeakable. It's such a tragedy. And I, having been at NATO, having been to Ukraine, and knowing how much those people have fought for their freedom in the Maidan demonstrations, they have stood so tall for wanting to be part of the West. And to have them just overrun like this is just a tragedy in the making. And of course, I know that everyone in America is in solid bonding with the Ukraine, and most certainly the NATO allies are, and we all will do everything we can within the realm of possibility to help the Ukrainians help themselves to ward off this terrible invasion of their country.
Do you believe the U.S. and NATO and Europe are doing all they can? Are they doing enough to help Ukraine defend itself?
I think we have done several things right, but I think we're not doing enough right now. I think that we need to come down with every lever we have, especially with sanctions. I think we need to go into the heaviest sanctions against Russia to really hobble their economy. We need to have trade controls that will keep them from being able to sell their Russian oil and gas and hold it as leverage. And I think we could do more. And I'm not being critical of what has been done so far, because I think we are taking the right steps. I think we are correct in imploring Europeans to support harsher penalties against Russia, because this is the time that the world will be watching, potential adversaries will be watching to see if we are strong and united as NATO and as the West. And if we are strong and we make Russia pay a price for doing this, that is our best hope, that we will not see further incursions into other sovereign nations that would call us to actually put troops on the ground. If we go in, if Russia goes into a NATO country, we're committed to then be troops on the ground defending that country as if it were ours. That's what NATO did for America when we were attacked on 9/11, and is what we have pledged our honor to do for any NATO country. So now we stop them before they think that we would be so weak that we would allow Russia to come on one of our NATO allies' soil. This is so important for holding on to our Western way of life, our democracies, and standing with the people who have fought for their freedom already and are doing so right now.
How concerned are you that Putin will go further and attack a NATO country? Because Ukraine is a partner, right? It's not a NATO country.
Correct. Ukraine is a partner, and we have not pledged to any partner that an attack on them is an attack on us. Allies, we have made that pledge. And the only time that article has been invoked is after 9/11. I think so much depends on what kind of united front we have in repelling and isolating Russia. That will determine if Russia thinks they can get by with going into one of our allies. That's why it's so important, and it's important for America that we stand behind all of these sanctions, and that we know the importance of standing with Ukraine, because if we stand strong and if the Europeans stand with us, which we're not quite there yet, but I am imploring the Europeans to allow all of the sanctions to go forward so that the Russian economy is crippled. That will be the best message that we can give to President Putin, that you cannot do what you're doing now in Ukraine any further, but that you should back off in Ukraine as well.
I know one thing that hasn't been done yet is cutting off Russia's access to the SWIFT financial clearing system. And I read that President Biden and the United States could do that unilaterally without Europe's support, should they?
I think we should do everything we can unilaterally, yes, but it will not have the same impact if we don't have all of Europe in the same system of sanctioning. Russian ability to do anything in euros or dollars, that would be the best thing to show Putin that we're serious and that they are going to suffer. President Putin needs to know that he is going to pay a price for what he is doing, which is outrageous in 2020, that we would be seeing tanks and trenches and the kind of behavior that the Russians are doing right now. President Putin needs to know that this is not acceptable, and we need to use every tool we have right now to show him that, because so far we have not deterred President Putin just by the threat of sanctions. Now we have put some of those sanctions in place, but we need Europe and America, as well as Canada, to, and it really, in fact, all of our partners, all of the NATO partners should be involved in implementing these sanctions, because if we cripple Russia enough that it gives President Putin problems with his own populace, then that might make a difference to him, which apparently nothing else has.
Why now? Why is Putin doing this now? And has the policy of Europe and NATO and the US been one of trying to appease him?
I think that President Putin is testing us. I think all of our adversaries now, and you could go around the globe and point out our adversaries, they're looking at how we handle this, but they looked at how we handled Afghanistan. And I think that emboldened our adversaries to think that, well, maybe we would just go away. Also, when President Putin invaded Georgia in 2008, and then Crimea, part of Ukraine, in 2014, everybody was very concerned about it. We stood strong and said this is wrong, but there were no real consequences. We need to have consequences for this. He needs to know that Russia will suffer, that his people will suffer. There will be Russians killed. There will be people who will not be able to get food supplies. There will be people who will be very cold in the winter. We need to make sure that President Putin pays a price for this, so that he does not think he can go into a NATO country, which would call Americans as well as all of our allies into the fight.
Let me ask you, when you were the US ambassador to NATO, was there ever a point where you had, and President Trump had to stare down Putin? Were you concerned that he was going to do something like this during your term? And what, if so, what did you and the administration do to prevent it?
Well, I don't think we had this kind of menacing that we are seeing today in the time I was at NATO. We did have, of course, the violations of the INF Treaty, and we withdrew from that treaty because Russia was violating, and we proved that they were violating. And our NATO allies stood with us to withdraw from that treaty and begin to prepare defenses for the missiles that Russia was manufacturing in violation of the INF Treaty. That was something where NATO came together. We were strong because we had the proof that NATO NATO had the proof that Russia was manufacturing against the tenets of the INF treaty, the intermediate range missiles that they eventually have put in Crimea and other border areas of Russia that face Europe. And so we have seen this playbook. We have seen Russia violate treaties, even as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago. Russia was saying, we have no intention of invading Ukraine. We're not going to invade another country. We're not going to do that. And what did they do? They are killing Ukrainians right now. They are killing soldiers at the border, and with abandon. They are going toward the capital of Ukraine to take over another sovereign nation after saying 2 weeks ago, we have no intention of doing that. So we have seen this. We know now. And the Europeans should sit up and take notice and stand with us that we would freeze them out of all of the economies. And
why aren't they?
Europeans don't think as security minded as Americans do. Americans assess a risk and then we deter against it. Europeans want to have diplomacy. They want to see if they can work things out. They want to try to keep doors open. And that works sometimes, and you never want to walk away from diplomacy, but you've got to be clear-eyed. When someone violates treaties, as President Putin has for years, when they violate their word, when they say one thing that's clearly not true, like we're not going to invade Ukraine, the Europeans will still want to talk about this and not freeze them out of their financial systems. And that's what we're trying to get them to do right now. And we have to urge them. We have to really come down and say, this is your interest to do this. Yes, maybe there will be goods that you will not be able to get. Maybe you will not have all the supplies you need, but we're willing to sacrifice that in order to make sure that we don't get in a war with Russia, which is any invasion of a NATO country will cause that to happen. And so we're looking out ahead, and the Europeans need to come to the table with us.
I appreciate your time very much. I just had a couple of other questions. Wanted to follow up on what you said before about the INF treaty when you were U.S. ambassador to NATO. Whatever came to that, did Russia back down after the united front by NATO or no?
They already had the missiles that they needed when we left the treaty so that we could start building the defenses to those missiles. That's when it was too late for them to back down. They already had the missiles. Now we're in the process of having the defense capabilities against those intermediate range missiles, but those intermediate range missiles can reach all of Europe from the Russian border. And the Europeans wanted to have all the proof that we had, and we showed them the proof, and they supported then our withdrawing from the treaty. But we were adhering to the treaty and not putting up the defenses. And Russia was doing all of this for several years. And it took a while for our NATO allies to come together with us and for us to have the will to drop out of the treaty so that we could, in accordance with the treaty, begin to build the missile defense system. Now we have it, and they know we have it, but it is very important that we see Russia for what it is. And it's no longer trust, but verify. It's just verify.
And let me ask you, there's been a lot of discussion about U.S. energy policy currently under the Biden administration. Has that pumped up Putin? And what do you think needs to be done in response? I've read a lot saying if we would increase exports from the United States of liquefied natural gas, that to Europe and other countries, so that they wouldn't rely on Russia, that would help cripple him.
Absolutely. We need to open the doors, and there are I guess, let me start again. We need to open the doors for exporting liquefied natural gas. And the Secretary of Energy now has on her desk the ability to let 2 or 3 more LNG facilities that would be able to go from the pipeline into a ship over to Europe. And they are not clearing because of environmental concerns. Well, liquefied natural gas is the cleanest form of energy that we have today, except for nuclear, which is also very clean. And we need to provide our European allies the gas they need, so they don't have to rely on Russia and have that leverage that Russia holds. We have said from the very beginning of this Nord Stream 2 deal that Germany agreed with Russia to allow to come into Germany. We have been putting sanctions on that and imploring Germany not to bring any more natural gas in from Russia to Europe, because we knew that Russia would use it as leverage, as they have done against Ukraine already. And yet Germany pressed on because they wanted the cheap LNG that Russia could provide. But now security requires that the US put our excess of natural gas into LNG facilities and ship it to Europe so that they will have affordable gas for their people. We want them to do that. And there are other outlets as well. Norway, in the Middle East, we have producers of natural gas. There are other places they can get natural gas besides Russia, and the Europeans should put security first. But we also need to do that in America. We need to open the spigot on liquefied natural gas production and the facilities to export it. And we also need to reopen the Keystone XL pipeline. Not only would it create jobs in America, but it creates energy sufficiency. So we don't buy gas from Russia. We have bought oil from Russia as recently as several months ago, because we closed the XL pipeline to bring in oil and gas from Canada, our neighbor, our good ally. We need to rethink what we're doing in our own energy interests, and that is to make energy independence for America. We had that in the last few years. We had energy independence because we were producing. Now, the administration just canceled leases in the Gulf of Mexico to drill for oil and get natural gas. We need to say this is a security issue for America. We do not want to be under Russia's thumb, and we don't want Europe to be under Russia's thumb. We see what Russia will do.
Is the Cold War back?
Right now, we are seeing a Cold War, but what we need to do is prevent a hot war. And how we act in this Cold War period with Ukraine will determine if we are going to get into a hot war, which would be so much more dangerous for America. It's why Americans need to see that we are standing with Ukraine and that it is in our interest to do so.
Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO and Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, thank you so much for your time and insight. We really appreciate it.